So next up, we are going to shift to the next track now. The race your culture track is over. That were now really 2 hours filled, crammed with a lot of stuff that we thought is important to touch, to give an impulse, to give a spotlight on. Now we're coming to the race yourself track. We are going to talk a lot about how to take charge of your own life, how to evolve as human beings, how to become the best version of yourself. We'll start today off with 2 talks on mental health. Why? Because we believe this is something that is not talked about enough. We need to talk about this much more, especially in the times of pandemic, in the times in these times where a lot of people feel lonely, entrepreneurs under a lot of pressure, especially in the startup world. We talk a lot about the ups, the shiny things, the valuation rounds, etc. We don't talk enough about the failures. Yes, we do sometimes, but also the personal, let's say, stories and what founders, entrepreneurs, but also everybody else that wants to take charge of their own life is going through. So I'm happy to introduce as the next speaker Philip, who is a medical doctor, who is a CEO and founder of BrainBoost, and he is combining mental health with neuroscience and with technology. So welcome, Philip, and welcome to the Race Yourself track.
All right. Hi. Thanks for having me. So should I start out right away? Yes. Perfect. So
yes, please.
Thanks. All right. So the original title of the talk was BrainMaps, a manual for your brain. But then I figured out, I want to go with the pirate theme. So I would say it's a treasure map for your brain. Sorry, I didn't get that the first time I mentioned this this talk. So just real quick, who am I? I'm a medical doctor, and I'm the founder of BrainBoost. That means what I tell you has a lot of medical foundation, a lot of research behind it, not just ourselves, but a lot of research going on. As Manuel said, mental health is still something that is underrepresented in most areas of our life. So what I want to talk to you about is how we can actually already measure and understand mental health. And then hopefully this can build a basis for any further presentations you will hear over the next days to build on. Just briefly about BrainBoost and what we do. So we define ourselves as pioneers of mental health with some love for technology. So what we do is we do research and projects with companies. We also have individual people that we work with. We do a lot of measuring of meditation because we want to understand the topic better. And we also have corporate health programs for corporate clients where it's focused on mental health. We do peak performance trainings for individuals. For example, we just had an ultra runner who ran 170K. And then we also do some leadership trainings for executives who want to implement more mental health and more mindfulness in their companies. So talking about mental health and fitness, we usually always combine mental health and fitness. And the reason is we believe that this model represents how we perceive mental health and fitness. So let's just say in the middle of this model, there is a neutral state. That would be, if you're in this neutral state, you would say, all right, I feel okay. I wouldn't say I'm like particularly into mental fitness, but I'm doing all right. Everything that is below this state would be considered an impairment of your mental health. So that means if you're actually struggling from stuff that is decreasing your quality of life, like depression, anxiety, sleeping disorders, so any psychological or neurological issues would be things that damage your mental health. And in that case, so if you kind of like find yourself in this mental health area, then you should go see a doctor, a psychologist, or another health practitioner, because then usually you have a medical problem and you will need professional help. If you are out of this health state and you're in a neutral state, then you can still say, okay, I want to improve my mental fitness and I want to improve my brain's performance. That means whenever I want to focus or learn something new, it works easily and I can sustain the state over a longer time. I can regenerate accordingly like I want to. I can, in the evening, I can, feel confident. I can feel calm. I don't feel stressed out. I can sleep well. And also I'm able to be empathic with other people or just have a great way of communicating. These are all mental fitness skills. If you miss them, I wouldn't say you have a problem, but if you have them, your life is much easier and more fun. And so unfortunately, what we see is in the current trends that more and more people are struggling with mental health. So here you can see over the last 20 years in Germany, the days that were missed due to medical issues. And here you can see that mental issues or mental health issues are becoming more and more the reason why people cannot go to work. They actually almost doubled within the last 20 years, while other problems like orthopedic issues or cardiac issues stay roughly the same. So now you can say, okay, maybe people are just more sensible for these topics. Yes, but this still means that we need to be aware of it. And this means the company needs to be aware of it. The team needs to be aware of it, but also you as an individual need to be aware of this topic. So following different health reports, we actually see that 90% of all days that people cannot go to work are due to mental health issues. So that's already the number one reason why people cannot go to work. It's right up there with orthopedic issues, but it's unfortunately a growing problem. So I think, and we as a startup think that one of the core skills for the future, one of the core soft skills will be resilience. Resilience is your ability to resist stress in a sustainable way, in a way that you can do this for many days, weeks, and even years without compromising your brain or your well-being or your health. And so there's different ways to achieve resilience, but I will start out with a very easy way to kind of calculate your resilience. You have to see how this applies to you, but basically it's very simple. On the one hand, you do have something that creates stress, which is workload, but not only workload. We can see that also in your leisure time, most people have more exhausting hobbies or more exhausting things they do, like watching TV while having some stuff on their tablets open, while doing some stuff on their phones. This is also not very relaxing. It creates stress for our brain. So it's not only the workload that creates stress, but it can be all the things that take away energy from us. And so when you add up all that stuff that creates stress, then you will have your resources on the other side. This can be just simply that you have skills to do something. So obviously the workload, if you put it very simple, if you have to carry some stuff that weighs 50 kilos and you have enough muscle to carry that, you have enough resources, so there's not a problem. And in the mental health, you have the same thing. Do you sleep well? Do you recover well? Can you deal with difficult conversations? Can you deal with long terms of focus? If so, perfectly fine. So basically, when you add up all the workload you have and you subtract all the resources, you should get somewhat even. If not, then there might be a resilience gap. That means that you have more workload than you can handle with your resources. So over time, this will lead to problems. And your resilience is not high enough to cope with the workload. If your resilience is high enough, this can be because you lower your workload or you have more resources built up, then you will even have a resilience bonus and you could even take some more workload or just, have a higher quality of life, for example. So this is something that everybody can figure out for themselves. And to show you what's influencing these parameters, I picked up this study from Deutsches Ärzteblatt. They were actually looking at the German people in Germany during Corona pandemic. And then they were figuring out what are risk factors for these people. What are risk factors for a high resilience gap? And they actually found out that it is a risk factor to be female, of young age, consume a lot of media, and also to think about Corona a lot, and also if you have financial worries. And I don't know about you guys, but in our team, for a lot of people, exactly this applies. Yeah, this is exactly our age group and the people that want to shape the businesses for tomorrow and the world of tomorrow, most of us are in this group. And there's even some very mean things in there, like media consumption, because media consumption, if you have a lot of negative news about COVID, for example, this can increase your load. So you have more stress to deal with, but at the same time, you are losing resources because you are in front of the TV instead of doing something that actually creates your resources. So you're losing resources and increasing your load. And this can lead to a problem with your resilience and create a resilience gap. Now, what's very important to understand about this is the brain does not feel pain, which sounds good, but it's actually a big problem, because that means if the brain feels something is wrong, then it cannot tell you by creating pain. When we feel a headache, it's not our brain, but it's more those like skin-like things that are around the brain. They can cause a headache if you drink not enough water or too much other stuff like alcohol, then you will feel a headache, but it's not the brain itself. So the brain can only show in a very indirect way that it's having some problems. And so this is why I want you to be aware of these red flags. If these things show up over a period that is longer than 2 weeks or a month, then you also should go see a doctor about it. So for example, sleeping problems, rumination, you always constantly have those thoughts in your head, then problems with concentration and problems with, getting up in the morning and getting your stuff done, and also losing interest, joy of things that you had joy before. So these are things that you should be aware of, and they are not as direct as pain, but this makes it even more tricky to figure out that you have a resilience gap. So what we mainly do is we try to make data-driven resilience and resilience training. So we try to figure out how can we measure what I just talked about and thus help people to increase their resilience levels. And our core technology is actually the EEG, which is a way to measure brain activity. Usually people have caps like the guy in the left-hand side on the picture. So we just put on a cap, we push away the hair a little bit, and then we can measure the electric activity that your brain is generating. And usually when we look at that, we see those scribbly lines that are originating from your brain. These are the result of brain cells communicating with each other. So when brain cells talk to each other, they create electric currents, and this is exactly what we can measure. It looks very crazy in the first view, but if you look a little bit closer, then you will see that there's a lot of detail hidden in these brain waves, in these EEG waves. So this slide is very important because everything I will say afterwards will be based on this slide. If you just had one brain cell, and this brain cell could send information via electric impulses to somewhere else, then you could just watch this one brain cell and figure out exactly the frequency with which this brain cell is sending information. So if this brain cell had a very slow frequency of sending information, just once per second, for example, then the brain cell would be asleep. So in a very slow frequency of information, brain cell is sleepy. If it's getting a bit faster, like 4 to 8 times per second, the brain cell is sending an information, then we are awake, but we feel somewhat tired and usually are not able to focus well. If it gets faster, then we are getting more and more into a relaxed state where we are able to be a bit more focused. And then the faster this brain cell sends information, here in the high beta state, we are at like 30 times per second. This brain cell is sending an information to other cells. Then we are usually focused, but this also costs a lot of energy to stay in this state. So usually we try to reserve that state for some very focused moments. And since we don't have just one brain cell and we cannot really determine this one frequency of this one brain cell, but we have hundreds of millions of brain cells, we usually don't have this one brain frequency, but instead we have a spectrum of brain frequencies. And this is very important because this way we can figure out what the brain is doing roughly. And one side note, those brain frequencies, they have those Greek names, but they are a bit mixed up because they are in the order that they were actually described when first measured, which was actually 100 years ago, was the first EEG in Germany. So this is why the alpha frequency is in the middle of the spectrum. And then when it gets faster, then we have beta and high beta and so on. And then when it gets slower, we have delta and theta because they figured out later on that, oh, we need some slower activities. This is why the order is a bit mixed up. So usually when we measure brains, we see something like this. We can see that, okay, the whole spectrum is somewhat present, but there is a some activity is very much present. That means a lot of brain cells are fluctuating in this brain state. So for example, if someone is very focused or very stressed, we would see a very high impulse in the fast frequencies. If someone is more tired or is going to a ruminating state, then we would see a higher higher amount of the brain cells being in a slow wave activity. And so by determining those brain states, we can figure out what the brain is actually doing at this point. And in an ideal world and with a high level of resilience, your brain would automatically switch to the state that is perfect for the task you're about to do. So right now, if you're trying to listen to what I'm explaining to you, then you should be somewhere in this yellow to orange area. Most of your brain parts should be active. If you're trying to, fall asleep or just are on vacation and try to relax, then bigger parts of your brain should be in this state. They should be more relaxed and tired. And if this does not work anymore, then we have a problem, because then we don't feel well anymore, and things that have worked before, like falling asleep and focusing, don't work as well anymore. And this can be a problem short term, but it can also be a problem long term. And this is where the sustainable resilience kicks in. So what our brain does is it has this mechanism that is called neuroplasticity. That means our brain can adapt to short-term changes that will happen over and over again in a positive and in a negative way. So let's say you have a stressful day. Usually you go to bed, next time you wake up and it's okay. Your brain has had time to relax and it's all good again. So your high beta frequency went down and you're back to alpha, perfect. But if this happens again, you have the next stressful day and the next stressful day and the next and the next. At some point, your brain will not just have some brain cells in the beta state, but it will actually do a structural change. That means your brain will adapt to being able to create more beta activity easier. Faster activity will be created more likely by your brain because it's altering the synapses and the transmitters and so on. So it actually changes how the brain is structured. And this can be a problem because then it will be much more likely for you to feel stressed and to get stressed, and your brain will shoot into this alarmed mode much more quickly. And so this is where this neuroplasticity model, which can also be very positive. So for example, after a stroke or a head injury, your brain can remodel and gain functions back that it had lost some time ago. But it can also be the negative way that the brain actually adopts negative behaviors like anxiety or stress and stuff like this. So this is something to be aware of. Your brain will be able to short-term change between activities, yes, but if you do this over and over again, there will be structural changes to your brain. This also shows you why you have a typical learning curve that has usually like 2 peaks in it. This is not only for mental health, this is in general. So usually you have a quick first success, like after the first minutes you understand how it works, perfect. This is the short-term adoption of your brain. The brain learns to switch into specific activities that fit well the task that you're trying to do. And then when you try to get better at it, you usually have some stagnation, because that's exactly the point where the brain goes from a short-term change to a long-term change. Yeah? And this is exactly when we stick through that stagnation part, this valley of death, then eventually we will have some long-term effects, and this will be more sustainable. Okay, now finally talking about brain maps. Brain maps are a way to display the EEG activity that we just talked about in a way that is more intuitive to understand. And so we have usually these heads that represent different activities like delta, theta, alpha. We just talked about them. And then we see by the color how many brain cells are in this activity. And this is an example from a person with ADD, attention deficit disorder, and with the task to focus on something like a text or something I say. And here you can see that the brain is generating a lot of slow wave activities, delta, theta, alpha 1. So this is why for this person it's hard to focus, because the brain is not doing what it should be doing. It should be somewhere in the beta state, but it's actually in theta and alpha state. This makes it hard to focus, and this is why it's a problem for this person. Next example is somebody with burnout. So burnout is something that is getting more and more popular, unfortunately. And here we have a brain that is in I would say like a medium burnout state, because what do we see? We see that this brain in the frontal part is generating a lot of theta activity, but at the slow wave activity that is telling the brain, all right, you can calm down. but at the same time, it's generating a lot of beta and high beta activity. So that means this brain has the brakes on in the one part, and it has the gas pedal fully pushed down. So this is not very efficient. And this is also why these people will struggle from burnout. The brain is actually wasting a lot of energy and it's not very efficient doing so. So we can also see this in the brain maps. Chronic fatigue syndrome, which is something that has become more and more popular, even with long COVID. Long COVID is a form of chronic fatigue. And here we have a similar pattern. This brain is also somewhat stuck in alpha activity, which is somewhat relaxing, but not when it's in the frontal part of the brain, because then it's hard for us to stay focused. And at the same time, it's generating a lot of beta activity, which is, again, somewhat on the brake and then still pushing down the gas pedal. And this is why it's very hard for these people to get up and perform accordingly to what they want to do. So here you can also see in the brain map the problem that the brain is not behaving very efficiently. A positive example. So here we have a person that has been meditating for over 20 years doing Zen meditation. And in this exercise, he's actually trying to be very, very calm and aware of his situation. So it's not a focused meditation, but it's more of a perceptive meditation. And we can see that he manages to focus a lot of his brain cells, over 60%, in this alpha state. And this is a result of a long-term effect of mental health training. People are able, if you go back, not to have their brain cells all over the place, but instead really focus them to specific activities that they want to focus on. And this is something that we see as a result of mental health training. It takes a lot of time to practice, but this is one of the key factors of resilience, to be able to switch into the right state for your brain, for the right time or for the right task. And you can see a result that's, I would say, very impressive. All right, so now these are the general ideas of brain maps. So I now have prepared a few brain types for you guys, so you can see which one you might be, and then I'll give you a tip what you can do as your first step for mental health training. So let's skip over this. All right, so this is very simplified. To be honest, I'm only pointing out what is the general tendency of this brain type. So the first part is the high beta brain. High beta means there's a lot of fast wave activity. These people generally have a high activity level. They have a desire to keep control. They might tend to overthink things, and they might tend to go more for rational and having troubles to just go with the flow and be relaxed. And they might tend to get stressed and agitated. So there's not only advantages or disadvantages, every brain type has a different strengths and weaknesses. So here we have the high beta brain type. Maybe some of you already recognize themselves. At the end, I'll go over them, all of them again, and then you can figure out which matches you best. So high beta brain. Then we have the high beta anxiety brain. Here we have the problem that the brain is very much dominated by high beta activity, but one part of it, the left frontal lobe, doesn't create as much activity. It's more in a slow wave activity, but the left frontal part of the brain is responsible for filtering negative thoughts. So here there is a big door for negative thoughts that can come into a brain that is then on a very high level of activity. And this causes that you have the strong desire to keep control in a high level of activity, but at the same time, you have the feeling that you're losing control, you're getting anxious quickly, and you're starting to ruminate a lot about things. The frontal alpha brain, this is the typical brain that we see in people with depression. Here we see that the entire frontal lobe is generating alpha activity, which is less focused than beta or high beta activity. And since the frontal lobe is responsible for filtering activity, in this part, a lot of negative thoughts can pop into your head, a lot of negativity, a lot of self-doubts. So this is why we usually have here a big rumination, trouble falling asleep. It's hard to make decisions. You always feel uncertain about decisions, and sometimes you have a lack of drive as well. Yeah, so frontal alpha brain. Then we have the frontal theta brain, and this is often combined with a more general activity level. So here, the frontal part is responsible to connect our limbic system with our conscious brain, and this part is usually there to, give us some ideas about what to do and keep us alive and create some short-term desires and rewards. So if this part is not so active, the filter is not so active, and we get a lot of info from our limbic system, which can lead to impulsivity, volatility, and affinity for addiction or trouble with focus, and affinity for high risks, because these people prefer the short-term rewards over long-term rewards. Then we have the theta brain. This is what I already talked about for ADD. I already showed you this. So we have a lot of slow wave activity that's just generally present, which can have some disadvantages like daydreaming, lack of focus, but it can also lead to a big strength in creativity and empathy and communication skills, and also some kind of hyper focus that people get really sucked into something and just go with the flow and work with it. I don't know, I kind of like this, or when I created the slides, it made me think like, what would be the balanced brain? How would it look like? And so the perfect brain, but it can also be that this is the boring brain, you know, because it has no specific strengths maybe. But at the end of a lot of mental training, you would ideally like to have something like that. So you have the highest activity pole in the left frontal lobe. So your consciousness, the captain of your brain, is in charge of things and is active enough to control everything else. And you have the parietal, so the back part of your brain, is somewhat relaxed, gives you some slow waves activity, so you can be focused and on target. You're comfortable to make decisions because this is a frontal lobe skill. You keep control, but at the same time, you're mindful, empathic, you have great communication skills, and you feel calm and fall asleep easily. So this constellation would probably the best balanced brain. All right, so now here I have a quick overview over these brain types. We have the high beta brain. So if you feel like you're in the high beta brain, then you really need to find things to calm you down. And don't cheat yourself and say, oh yeah, I go running to calm myself down, but at the same time, your head just keeps going. Really try to get your brain used to just enjoying some calm and quiet at some points and sometimes, yeah? Okay, so here you actually need to find relaxation. The high beta anxiety brain, here, just relaxing will usually not help because it will cause stress, because then the anxious thoughts will come through more easily. So here, actually, something that helps is, for example, journaling or a diary that helps to really understand what you would be grateful for, what strengths and positivity you have. So here you kind of need to build up some security and make sure your environment is more secure so that the rest of the brain can actually relax and don't get the feeling that you're losing control and will be overwhelmed with stuff soon. The frontal alpha brain actually needs to focus more on stuff because the frontal part, which should be the captain, is too relaxed. So this leads to just crazy rumination. So here you actually need something to focus on, like light activity or focused meditation, something like that. If you have the frontal theta, it's a very similar direction, but it can also be here an idea to find also just some calm that you can actually focus on. Don't feel like too much FOMO, yeah, fear of missing out. Just try to stay relaxed, focus on the positive things, and get some structure in your life. Same with the pure theta type. Structure, you know, in work, organize yourself well. In private life, you have to organize yourself well. This is something that really benefits those theta types. And the balanced brain, I guess, if you want to improve in a way or the other, make sure to, you know, try to go into some extremes sometimes, you know, try to focus a lot, let go. So try to kind of like go into the other 5 brain types time after time so your brain stays flexible. All right. So this was a brief overview over the most brain types. Just real quick to finish this off, the next step for us is to use AI, artificial intelligence, to analyze those brain types even more, and then figure out, for example, how we can tell people with depression from healthy people apart, or how we can, for example, figure out what exactly meditation does to the brain. So this is what we're working on right now to create even more knowledge about those brain maps and the brain activity, because there's a lot of knowledge to be gained still. And to finish off, just a little tip for you guys. We learned about the neuroplasticity, and we learned that we do have certain brain types and we can change them, but it will take some time. So figure out which brain type you are, and then just implement 5 minutes every day for mental health exercise to try to, you know, change the brain type more into a direction that you feel is more resilient. And I always say, just like brushing your teeth, everybody brushes their teeth every day, once or twice. And this is what we should do for our mental health exercise as well. So yeah, hopefully you can pick some routine up that you can do every day. And with that, Manuel, I'm done, hopefully on time.
Philip, just in time. Thank you very, very much. Great insight into really a scientific approach of brain types, brain activity, etc. Fascinating work that you are doing. There are a lot of questions that popped up here of the community. We don't have the time to answer them. Maybe you have time now to go to a networking table, maybe answer some of the questions if the people also would go over. It's up on that side, I think, in one of the tabs, has a little live small logo in there. Philip, thanks so much for sharing your work, your insights. Really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and have fun.
Bye. Thanks.